Quick question. Who is your best friend? Who is your best friend?
It's time for another show from Colin Jones, the Reasonable Adventurer. Time for you to take another step towards creating your own opportunities for satisfaction.
And it is a huge welcome to episode 110 of The Reasonable Adventurer. And I wonder, who is your best friend? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Remember when you were young, you're in the playground, who's your best friend? And you had to sort of try and work out who you weren't going to offend. Or maybe it was you had the pride of being able to say your best friend was someone who was incredibly popular or well-liked. What about if your best friend was you? I'm pretty sure growing up that my best friend was me. And the longer I went through life, the more that became obvious to me. Because if you failed as often as I have, and I am, if I'm an expert on anything, it's failure. There's a lot of reasons for that, but part of the reason for being able to say that you're an expert on failure is that you just accept it. You just accept that you're not that good at a hell of a lot of things. And that's really been the story of my life, not being particularly good at very many things and never really getting things right the first go, and quite often having to just keep working through the experience of something before the penny drops. And that's fine. That's who I am, and I can accept that that's the nature of how I roll. But along the way, some of those failures have been pretty spectacular. And they never leave you. You never remember, you never forget the circumstances that evolve from some of those spectacular failures, and how long it took to dig yourself out of that hole and get back to sort of square one. So, through that process, if you cannot become your best friend, if you cannot become your best supporter, the person who's going to forgive you, if you can't do those things, it's very, very hard to actually get back and find a way to sort of just get your life back on track. You could say it the other way around, couldn't you? You could say, as a result of already being your best friend, you had a hand up. You actually were able to come back from those things, as opposed to having found yourself in that situation, you decided you had to become your best friend in order to make that journey back. I suspect my imagination as a kid growing up, we didn't have the Netflixes and the internets and the things. You just had a hammer and a nail and a bush out the back that you could run around in, and a few friends. And for me, it wasn't about facts and figures. It was about my imagination. Imagining that something was possible, right? Going to sleep of a night time thinking about what I was going to do the next day, building a tree fort or something like that, but being excited by the possibilities that my imagination brought forth. And it's interesting when I delve into literature on scholarship of teaching and learning, and I see concepts like identity by Palmer, selfhood, and you're thinking through this concept. Okay, if I'm really going to be good as an educator, if I'm going to be successful in life, I have to be on even terms with who I am. I have to be able to be honest with myself. I have to be comfortable with myself. And yet we're all sort of struck down by quite a lot of anxiety in life. This is from Rollo May's book on Man's Search for Himself. And he has this lovely little... He's talking about anxiety and the challenges that it creates for us all. And he talks about the bewilderment that anxiety brings to our lives. And he says this confusion as to who we are and what we should do is the most painful thing about anxiety. But the positive and hopeful side is just as anxiety destroys our self-awareness, so awareness of ourselves can destroy anxiety. That is to say, the stronger our consciousness of ourselves, the more we can stand against and overcome anxiety. Anxiety, like fever, is a sign that an inner struggle is in progress. I love it. I absolutely love the way that Rollo May... There's a lot of stuff that Rollo May writes that I really, really like. And I really like the way he talks about anxiety. He talks about anxiety as something that we have to have in our lives. We don't want to have too much of it, but we need it. Right? Because if we didn't sense an obstacle, a problem, a challenge, from where would that creativity and imagination spring? If we have too much of it, that's clearly a problem. That can really stymie us and sort of stop us in our tracks. And the way around it will be through this self-love. Will be through this higher level of consciousness of who we are. Will be through a process of forgiveness. So, I wanted to move on from those ideas, which are sort of, I won't say topical, but are easy to sort of get yourself into. If we talk about self-love and we think, oh yeah, one's regard for our own happiness or advantage in life, that's sort of nice, isn't it? Right? But what does it actually mean? Especially in the concept of the reasonable adventurer, where we're talking about an individual with a capability for creating opportunities for satisfaction. Seems a little bit selfish, doesn't it? But from my perspective, if I can achieve satisfaction in my life, I'm going to be able to share that satisfaction and the rewards that come with it, with my family, with my friends. So how do we find this balance between what we do as an individual and how we relate to other people, the collective, if we might call it that? Jung's work back in 1923, he also put it out in 1921, but I'm pretty sure that was just purely a German text. But his psychological types, or the psychology of individuation in 1923, I want to read you a little bit of that in terms of what he calls individuation, because I don't think we've really travelled a lot further than the brilliant thinking that Jung brought to this. So he talked about this notion of individuation. I'll read you a little bit of what he had to say. The concept of individuation plays no small role in our psychology. In general, it is the process of forming and specializing the individual nature. In particular, it is the development of the psychological individual as a differentiated being from the general collective psychology. Individuation, therefore, is a process of differentiation, having for its goal the development of the individual personality. Individuation is, to this extent, a natural necessity inasmuch as its hindrance, by an extension or actually exclusively levelling to collective standards. It involves a definite injury to the individual vital activity. What he's saying there is that we have to become an individual, because to not do that is to allow ourselves to sort of devolve to collective standards, where our ability is going to be hindered. It's going to be injured. So I'll go on, I'll pick another little section that he's got here. It is at once clear that a social group consisting of deformed individuals cannot for long be a healthy and prosperous institution, since only the society which can preserve its internal union and its collective values, while at the same time granting the greatest possible freedom to the individual, has any prospect of enduring vitality. I love that, because what he's saying is that if we all work together as individuals, we will do better than if we allow ourselves to just settle for collective values where we have to sacrifice something of ourselves in that context. He goes on to say, since the individual is not only a single, separate being, but, by his very existence, also presupposes a collective relationship. The process of individuation must clearly lead to a more intensive and universal collective solidarity, and not to mere isolation. So it's not good enough for us to go off and just simply be by ourselves and differentiate ourselves and say, I'm different from the world and I don't want to mix with the world. We need to discover our individuality and then understand how to use it in collective situations. It's just another couple of little passages I wanted to touch on here. So it says individuation is practically the same as the development of consciousness out of the original state of identity. So we're coming back to all of those key issues. Consciousness that Rollo May talks about, identity that Palmer talks about. Hence, it signifies an extension of the sphere of consciousness and enriching of the conscious psychological life. So I really like what he's doing there. Patricia Cranton, if you've read her work, she picks up on this really nicely in her book on transformational learning. She says, the development of the personality means fidelity to the laws of one's own being. The segregation of the individual from the undifferentiated and unconscious herd, and this means isolation. So there's a phase of isolation. However, she goes on to say, one goal of adult education and transformative learning in particular is individuation, the development of the person as separate from the collective, which in turn allows the person to join with others in a more authentic union. And I think what she's saying there is absolutely what we see in real life. When individuals can bring something of value to a collective situation. They're not looking to compromise and compromise and compromise so that we all get on. They're understanding what other people are bringing to the table. They're being mindful of that, sure. But there's a time when each individual has something unique to bring to that process of collective action. And I really, really like the way she works through that. What I wanted to do now is read you through a poem by, and you may have come across it, it's called The Invitation. I regularly share this with my students. And I share it with them in the same context I'm going to share it here, and that is as a process of self-audit. So in thinking about you as an individual, to start this process of individuation, we need, just like a caterpillar, if a caterpillar is going to become a butterfly, it doesn't click its fingers and say, okay, let's just get to that phase. It actually has to go through a really, really painful process, right? Painful. Where it brings in all those aspects of its past life, all that rubbish and all the other bits and pieces around it to construct that cocoon. And then it goes from being multi-legged to winged, and then it emerges with an entirely new opportunity for seeing society. Rather than seeing society as a leaf, it starts to see the leaves on trees as it flies above things. And it's an interesting metaphor because it can't happen. That process, that transformational process, can't happen without a degree of pain, a degree of isolation. So, I want to allow you, across this poem, which is The Invitation by Orion Mountain Dreamer, you can find it online very easily, I want you to think about how you would be positioned in relation to these challenges. So let me run through them. It starts with this. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the centre of your own sorrow if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or have you become shriveled and closed from the fear of further pain? I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with the wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betrayal of your own soul. If you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it's not pretty every day. And if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand at the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after a night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. That last paragraph is the one that I share with my students when I just share one of the moments from this poem. I'll repeat it again because I think it's a beauty. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. In the context of entrepreneurship education, this is pretty important. There are lots of ups and downs, and it can be an incredibly lonely ride, trying to follow your dreams, trying to create value which other people may yet not be able to imagine. And you are left to doubt yourself. Have you chosen wrongly? Are you heading in the wrong direction? There are always these moments of self-doubt. There's always natural tendency towards anxiety when things are getting a bit out of control, when you can't find the money to pay your bills, when you can't explore your own passions and plans for the future. There's a lovely quote by Florida Maxwell, Scott Maxwell. I'll read it to you. I always find a way to put it in my books. This is from Florida Scott Maxwell. She says, "You need only claim the events of your life to make yourself yours. When you truly possess all that you have been and done, you are fierce with reality." And I think this feeds really nicely back into Rollo May and his notion that if we can develop higher levels of consciousness, this will enable us to understand the world where there are these challenges for us, where this anxiety is present. And so what I was hoping that we would be able to move forward now and reflect on, and that's your challenge between now and the next episode, is how comfortable you are. How comfortable are you with yourself? Is there a fair bit of self-love in your life in regards to your own happiness, your own advantage? It's a strange time for all of us at the moment. We're being told that we should not be happy with our advantage in life, that we should feel guilty about that advantage. Maybe we shouldn't even feel happiness. These are all individual determinations that you can all deal with. From my own perspective, I'm starting to understand that anxiety is not a bad thing, but it can be. But it's going to be limited and governed by the degree of self-awareness I'm able to maintain. It's not a complicated issue. We can look back to Lewin's work, where he had that lovely equation that behaviour is a function of the interplay between people and their environments. Well, that interplay isn't accidental, and it's not happening in a blind room. The behaviour, in terms of development of the behaviour, is clearly linked to our understanding of our environment, what we can control, what we can't control. So, there's a challenge for you. I wonder how you travelled through that poem by Orion Mountain Dreamer, The Invitation. I wonder how that sort of set you back and made you think to yourself, maybe there's a bit of room for improvement in terms of my own forgiveness of myself, my own willingness to not default to what society wants from me, but for me to think about my own advantage and my own ability to move forward and take control of that. Whichever way you go, if you want to be effective, then it's going to be your differentiated self, the thing that stands you apart from other people, that's going to enable you to become something more than you currently are. So, I wish you well. If you're looking for such things to reflect on, very easy to go online and find Jung's The Psychology of Individuation. You can find the PDF copy for that, or you could just contact me and I could send it through to you. Very easy to get online and think about self-love and where you sit in relation to that. If you've got Parker J. Palmer's book, The Courage to Teach, you can certainly dip into his ideas on selfhood. Rollo May stuff, very easy to get. Search for Man's Search for Himself, very easy to get online these days. Patricia Cranton's work may be harder to get if you're not in an academic sort of setting. The Invitation, you can just type in The Invitation Orion Mountain Dreamer and you'll have that right at your fingertips. Or they're all good starting points in starting to ask yourself this question: what have I got to do to help myself to become more me and to be proud and happy with who I am, and then to understand how. How does that me, that individuated me, how does it best play with other individuated folks so that that collective outcome can be advanced? Until we chat again, keep reflecting.